Okay, folks, I'd just like to welcome you all on the call here this evening. My name is Shane Lennon, Games Manager here in Louth. As we've had a great start to the webinar series in 2021. Obviously, it's very strange times, and so I think there's a good initiative going forward, and that we can give some knowledge back to the coaches and keep people busy over the lockdown. Just a couple of housekeeping rules before we get going. This webinar is being recorded, so if you have any issue with being recorded, you can log out there now. And also, if you can everyone keep their cameras off and their mic on mute, and if you have any questions, just type them into the text box, and I will relay the message to Ciaran. Thanks very much. Just going to hand over to Ciaran, who is our performance GDA in Louth. Currently, he is over all the strength and conditioning and athletic development from under 14 right up until the Louth senior setup, both hurling and football. Just going to pass you over to Ciaran. Thanks very much. Ciaran, are you on mute?
Yeah, there's cameras. Is that it? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, evening everybody. Hope everybody's keeping well. Hope you've enjoyed the last two webinars. I know I learned a huge pile from them, so hopefully this evening there might be one or two nuggets you might take from tonight's webinar and implement your planning over the next few weeks. And hopefully we'll be back on the pitch soon. So tonight we're just going to touch on conditioning the GAA player through small-sided games, okay, and we're going to implement a bit of tactical periodization, okay. So the first part, okay, just a wee bit about myself, okay. Shane touched on it there, okay. So currently GDA with Louth and have been over, or currently over the senior team as well. Been on two international rules series as an S&C coach, 2015 and 2017. Been employed by Ulster Rugby for 5 or 6 years with the senior team, and coinciding that with looking after S&C for the Down GAA senior team as well. And I've been involved with Cross McGlen previously as well. Okay, so just kind of an overview of what we're going to cover tonight. Okay, we're going to just touch on the game demands. Okay, it's going to be geared towards, it will be senior inter-county GPS data. We're going to just touch on the demands of the game and how we create our sessions to hit those demands. The two different types of training or conditioning methods for team sports athletes, so small-sided games or intervals. Predominantly, we're going to just focus on small-sided games. And then we're just going to go into how we map out our small-sided games. How do we implement our principles and our sub-principles into these games? So they're not just basically running around after a ball. We're getting a conditioning demand, but we're also embedding the principles of what we want from our players. So just to touch on game demands and what we look at, okay, some coaches may have the luxury of GPS, some may not. But just to kind of touch on it, okay, so this is senior inter-county data. It's just an average of National League campaign, or sorry, a seasons campaign, Championship and National League. Okay, so you can see here the metrics across the top. So the usual one that stands out for players and coaches is total distance. For us as coaches, that's not really what we want to focus on. Okay, it is good just to give an overall volume, but it's really what happened in that 8.5K. Okay, so their distance per minute, their high speed running. So how much times they've gone above 19.8 kilometers an hour. Sprint distance, so 75% of their max speed. So if their max speed's 10 meters per second, anything above 7.5. How fast they've ran in the game and the amount of acceleration, so amount of accelerations moving towards the ball, and how many times they have to stop, change direction. And then high metabolic load is acceleration, deceleration, distance. So when you're using your GPS data, so this is just a player, okay, so this is just for one game. Above here is average across the season. So this is just GPS, what it will look like. So you can see here all this different speed thresholds. The high speed running distance wouldn't start counting until they hit zone 4. Parts of zone 4, so anything above 9.8 kilometers an hour, and then going into your very high speed running. Okay, you can see they spend a lot of time in zone 1, 2, and 3, but a lot of the studies will show the high intensity efforts, the speed efforts, are the ones that lead to a change of momentum in game, lead to an assist or lead to a score. Okay, so just to give you kind of a wee oversight of the game demands. Okay, so different strategies I've already touched on. Okay, so there's small-sided games and high-intensity interval training. We're going to predominantly just focus on small-sided games. We're going to touch on our principles, main principles, manipulating pitch sizes, manipulating game rules, and manipulating players' numbers. High-intensity interval training, I'm sure we've all seen it in action. It's prescribed work to rest time, so it might be 15 on, 15 off, 30 on, 15 off, set distances. Okay, so we're not going to spend too much time on that tonight. We're going to focus on small-sided games. Just to give you a wee bit of background on high-intensity intervals, if you want to go deeper into this, myself and Paul Dibley from Kildare designed a conditioning interval conditioning manual, so you'll be able to get a wee more information on that. But predominantly in GAA, you kind of 3 sets of hit intervals: your long intervals, your short intervals, and your tempo, which is more speed orientated. Your different types, so your intensive, normal, and extensive. So your work 1 to 2, 1 to 1, 2 to 1 work. So on your long and short intervals, our intensity is gauged off our maximum aerobic speed. That's basically
Folks, can we keep our microphones just switched off there? There's somebody with a microphone on.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so it's basically geared off a time trial. So it might be a 1K time trial, 1.2K time trial. Some coaches will go higher again, and you calculate your distance and your prescribed distances off it. Okay, so if you want to dig in a wee bit deeper to that, there's references at the end, and we'll direct you to that workshop. Your tempo then is a wee bit different in terms of you're looking to accumulate high speed running. So you're looking to get into the zone 5s or zone 4 and 5 that we touched on above. You want the player moving well, minimal fatigue, and getting them high speed running. Okay, so trying to get them. So at this time where we are now in this lockdown, everything's remote. They'd be the type of intervals I'd be prescribing to your players, with definitely 1 set of tempos in there, so players are getting that high speed running and they're not slowly slogging it out on the short and long intervals. Okay, so that'll be enough on interval strategies tonight. Everything else now will be geared towards small-sided games. Okay, before we get into the nitty-gritty of it, we're just going to look at the advantages and disadvantages of small-sided games compared to traditional running. Your advantage with your small-sided games are that it improves motivations in the players. We all know players would prefer to do as much as they can with the ball. You're training specific movements. You're developing your tactical awareness, your technical skills. I suppose this where kind of for a youth athlete, you got to balance this all up. Is small-sided games going to be more beneficial than traditional running? Are your players at a high enough tactical awareness, tactical skills to neglect 30, 40, 50% of your session to non-ball running? So it's something you got to weigh up depending on what age group you're working with. Touches per player. So in your small-sided games compared to a 15v15 game, I suppose it's what Go Games is all about, but it still applies for youth athletes and adult athletes, is getting touches per player. The less players on the pitch, the more touches. So if it's 4v4, 5v5, 6v6, more touches per player. And you also get an insight then into the character motivation of your players. Times I've run small-sided games, you'll have the one player who's running around getting on loads of ball. GPS numbers are really high. Sometimes he's not doing a huge pile on the ball. Sometimes he is doing a huge pile on the ball. And then you might have the other player who's kind of hanging out over on the touch lines, not really getting involved, not really running. So he's not getting a conditioning aspect, and he's not really influenced the game. So you get a good insight to your players too. The benefits of your traditional running is it's easily prescribed, easily monitored. You're able to see improvements easier. If you don't have GPS, it's obviously a lot easier to manage. You can see exactly how much running they're doing, how much high speed running they're doing, how much accelerations they're doing. So it's easier to monitor. Your disadvantages of your small-sided games, there's a lot more contact. Technical skills plays a huge part. So if a lot of the session, the balls on the ground are going out of the area or out of the grid, the game has to slow down. So no one's really benefit from a conditioning aspect. So technical skills is huge on it. And and then get player numbers. Okay, so at inter-county level, numbers usually isn't an issue, but at club level, underage, sometimes it could be. It was over teams before underage. You might only have 9, 10, 11 players. So you got to really think about your small-sided games avenue when your numbers are low, but sometimes it makes for a better session too, because you can get a lot of coaching done with your small numbers. So it's not having low numbers isn't an excuse just to go running. I think you can still combine both and still get a message delivery inside your small-sided games, even if your numbers are low. Your disadvantages then from your traditional running is players don't like to do it, so you'll always get a moan when they have to line up on the line, and it's not very game specific, so you're not able to work on your tactical, your technical, your tactical, your game awareness. You just got to tough it out for your 3, 4, 5 minutes, and players don't enjoy it, so you got to weigh up what works for you as a team, but also what age group you're coaching. At adults levels, yes, definitely, you do need a combination of both, I feel, and we'll touch on that as we go on. But a youth athlete, 13s, 14s, 15s, 16s, have had enough development tactically, technically to neglect a huge part. So it's for you as a coach to weigh that up, to know where your players are at. So now we're kind of just going to get into the nitty-gritty of designing our small-sided games and designing our game model and trying to implement that into our games. So when we're designing our game models, there's a few things to think about. Okay, the players we have in front of us. What type of player, what style of player? Are they technically efficient? Are they more athletic? Are they big? Are they small? So that has to cater into designing your game model. Your club and county structure and culture as well. Okay, so Carrifinn's probably a good example. Galway and Carrifinn both play attractive football. Obviously, it was a wee bit different for a few years there, but they're back now playing attractive football again. So there is a culture there. Crossmaglen, another club, kicking game, usually man for man. So they have a culture of way they want to do it. So if you're designing your philosophy, your club or your game model, your club may have a model, your county may have a similar model. So it's just something to look at. Maybe you might have to start afresh. Maybe it's not something your club looked at, and maybe you're starting a game model and how you want to model your club to play. Okay, so it all has to be weighed in, and then it comes down to your moments of the game. Okay, so there's 5 moments which we'll touch on as we go. Okay, so that's kind of the start of your map. Put your moments down on the paper, and everything should grow from there. And then that gives your session focus and your session creation a bit of guidance. So we touch on that as we go. Coaches' ideas. So how do we want the game to play? All coaches have a vision of how they want the game to be played. So catering the 3 before that, the moments of the game, the culture, the structure, the player capabilities, and then you got to implement what way you want your team to play, what way the vision you have and how you implement it. And to help you implement it and how you get your message across to your players is through your principles and sub-principles of play. Okay. So designing your game model. Okay, so the players in front of you has a huge influence on what you're going to do. I suppose Shane Walsh is a good example. He's had 2 different managers over the last couple of years. Both managers have used them differently. Kevin Walsh used them quite differently to how Porrick Walsh uses them now. Okay, so I would imagine the principles from Porrick and from Kevin Walsh would be quite different. How they viewed the game, the principles and sub-principles would be quite different, as they use Shane Walsh quite differently. I could be wrong, I am only guessing, but looking at how the style has changed, I would imagine. So Stephen Cluxton, we all know how good he is, okay, and how he's changed the kick-out game in GAA, and how Dublin have had huge success off that. Everything nearly starts off him. If it's not through a kick-out, it's through his leadership style and demanding standards in the changing room. Michael Murphy, okay, obviously huge influence on Donegal for the last number of years. We all know the famous kick out where he comes out to the middle and flicks it on and we get the runners. He drifts in between full forward and midfield. A huge amount of ball comes through him. Even if the ball isn't coming through him, he's making other teams think of what they're going to do. Okay, he may be man marked, he may be double marked, he may be triple marked. Okay, so he's influencing the game without even touching the ball. And then the hurling examples, Pa Horgan and Cork, you know, when you're coming up against Cork, same with Kilkenny, if you give away a free, it's a score. And we know the influence TJ's had in hurling over the last number of years as well. And then the Tipperary example then is, again, your game model or your strengths are going to influence the opposition. So against Tipperary, you don't really want to be raining ball down on the half back line, because mostly they're going to clean it up in the air. So you got to think twice of what you got to do. You may have to adjust your game model. So it's not always what it's also may influence your opposition. So just something to think about when you are designing it. Okay, so kind of touching on a concept, tactical periodization. So tactical periodization is kind of from Jose Mourinho, probably would have been the one who brought it to light in soccer circles, and it's transitioned into rugby and now is big in Gaelic football, or it is. Shane Mangum's doing his PhD and he actually presented to the GAA over the last lockdown. So that webinar is online if you want to dig deeper into this. Okay, so it's incorporating a tactical, technical, physical, and behavioural component in every training session. So everything is integrated into your training session. Okay, so when you're mapping out your training, each one of the game moments is the focus for that session. Okay, so it could be attack to defence, defence to attack, or contesting possession. Okay, so as we'll touch on again, as I said, this is where you start. This is the start of your session. You write these down in the paper and you let it grow from there. So you're trying to integrate one of these aspects, okay, into your training session. So everything is combined to improve the physical, but also the technical and tactical of your player. Okay, so as I said, if we just touch on condense for possession, okay, you want to have your main principle. So it starts with your main principle. So win your individual battle, and then it breaks into your sub-principle, okay? So creating and closing distance from your opponent, game intelligence. Okay, so having these sub-principles and principles, they're like instructions to your players. So they know when they pick up the ball, okay, if it's in defence, what's the first step to do? Look up, pass the ball forward, or whatever it may be. So it's giving players that they know when they're in a certain aspect of the pitch, what the next step is. Mightn't always come off, but at least they are aware of it. So it's kind of creating a wee bit of predictability in the chaos of the game. You'll not always be able to go to it, but it is your plan A. If it doesn't, then you revert to your plan B. You may have to work to the far side of the pitch. I suppose kind of analogy I use with the younger players is that when you're on the ball, you're like a quarterback. Okay, you got to be able to find your pass. But for that to happen, the player's not on the ball, or your wide receivers, they have to be moving into space. The quarterback knows where to put the ball. Mightn't always come off, but he knows where he has to look to put it. Okay, so it's for us as coaches, I suppose we got to focus on the player, not on the ball. Okay, we need to have the player moving into space, in and out of space, working with his teammates, holding depth, and not getting sucked to the ball. Like in American football, if no one ever comes running towards the quarterback, they always try and stay long. Same concept depending on what principle you want to go with. Okay, so as coaches, we need to focus on what's not happening when we don't have the ball. Our forwards are moving to help our defenders. Our halfback picks it up. Our forwards are moving into space on the far 45, or whatever it may be. These are just some of the concepts I'll touch on as we go in. Okay, so these are just your principles. You can use this when you're mapping it out. Okay, you may have more sub-principles than I have. Okay, you may have two. We just kind of touched on one or two. We are developing another workshop where we go deeper into it. Okay, we go a wee bit deeper. So you may have 4 or 5 sub-principles that you work off for each moment. Okay, so you can see transition from attack to defence. Okay, so how do we get our defensive shape when we lose the ball high up the pitch? Our defence, so when it's the opposition are building an attack, it's slow ball. What are we looking to do when we're in our defensive shape? Okay, and then moment of the game, your attack. Okay, so trying to find your space. So when we're in a slow attack, they've got numbers back. What are we looking to do? What's our principles? Our 14 stays on the 6-yard box. We have an 11 at the half forward line, whatever it may be. Okay, so there's 4. The 5th one we're going to look at is the one that I'm going to break down now. Okay, so it's our transition from defense to attack. Okay, so the main principle I'm working off here is depth and movement and attack. Inside that, our sub-principle is look up, first pass forward. May not always happen, but I always want the player to look up to deliver the pass. Like the analogy I use in the quarterback, he's not to see who's on for the pass. Okay, so look up and trying to move the ball forward to obviously bypass the opposition press or the bodies funneling back. Okay, our sub principle too is our kick, pass, and support runners. Okay, you may be totally opposite. You may want to play a running game. You may not want to kick the ball. You may have no forwards. You may have everyone behind the ball, whatever it may be. But just for tonight's example, our emphasis is kicking forward, kicking the ball forward. We're playing with 4 forwards with bodies behind the ball. Okay, so that's what we're kind of looking at. So we've turned the ball over in defence, and we want to get our attack moving as fast as possible, and we want to get ahead of the opposition's defensive structure or their press. Okay, Shane, just shout if this doesn't play well, and I'll jump to another video. And this video is just to put a wee bit of maybe just a picture of what we're looking to develop. Okay, it's a lot of words that I've been going on about. That's playing now. Is that jumpy, Shane? Or?
Yeah, it's very jumpy.
Yeah, I'll try this next one. Okay, so when we're just looking at these clips, this is the same clip Stephen used last week, okay, but I want you to kind of have a look at it in a different way. So instead of looking, obviously the skills are impressive and we need to have the skills, but we're looking at the moment of the game, contesting possession, and our transition from defence to attack. So we're looking at our kick passes, ideally trying to move the ball forward, look up, move the first pass forward. Is that better, Shane?
Takes it in well. Back in as far as full.
Yeah, just playing there.
So you can see here, I'm sure this is work at training. Okay, it's not just a nameless kick down to the sideline. They know where the runs is going to be. So they're transitioning from their defence to attack. Okay, he knows where Kilkenny's going to be. And now he's playing into his attacking structure. Okay, it's not by chance Dean Rock's there. Okay. So the next clip you're doing both contesting possession. So Donny wins the ball. Okay, he's getting his head up to look, not forward, but we'll give it forward, more lateral.
Okay. A wee bit ahead of you, or you're talking a wee bit ahead of it there, Ciaran.
I'll be quiet then. Just let them watch.
Mayo hoping to try and win Sam, as you know, for the first time in 65 years. Aidan O'Shea hoping to get his hands on the trophy later on. He's done well against Ciaran O'Sullivan. He lays it up here. Keegan! Goal! It's his 4th ever championship goal. David Clark belting it down. Paul Flynn jumping here, but it's won by the other midfielder for Mayo, Tom Parsons. Out via Jason Doherty. Aidan O'Shea once again feeding it forward here for Killian O'Connor. Teasing ball inside here for Andy Moran. Fitzsimons is near and gives it in beautifully. Keegan! He scored again!
Sinné go dtír Queen Ellen up she done the sauce the sin.
Well, the Alan Cronin and son agus Carl Silk in ruin the chéile tá siad scartha agus Shachwin Park. A reached us time the broad you could have veras a shoot. Size agus Malloy and Larsley. Undoubtedly on took a look on Malloy leis Norton. Harris and Raston on sort Pelle of Nick with a bark of book.
Fashion of fire, which the Gary Lee or the corridor, and the sale left him with the lawn till the
This is skewer shawl captainish. The vein to the extremity left nail. Yes, the hockey machen. Quite so hard to the point shot Ciaran. Machel for the Alan Burke. Reached gone in the wheeler. On Squealer and Keane. Quite inside again. Joe Kenny. Tackle Larsley, top. Dahi Burke tackle Lorna Park. You can you attack a tackle the Park. Sauce to that paint. Shachwin Gary Size. You should tackle son agus pass priority. Sachrahu Erigan the Holy Comes Spears a shot. Patrona again.
Tá points on Brian Darby on
Okay, so you can see in the clips how well rehearsed the what they're looking to do. You can see Andy Moran staying deep beside the keeper on the 6-yard box. Okay, that's not by chance. That's one of their principles, that Andy Moran staying deep so they can connect up play. Kilkenny picking the ball up in the pockets of the 45. Again, it's not by chance. They know that's going to be there. I suppose the second last clip of Cara Finn, the middle of the three, they're early inviting the opposition to press them. They're playing a keep ball in the bottom corner of the pitch, so they're inviting the team to press. One of them switches off and they're able to get over the high press, and then they're able to go man for man. So you can set it up that way where you'll set traps. It is risky, but you're encouraging teams to bite, press up the pitch, and then you can implement your transition from defence to attack. Okay, so there is certain aspects in what you're looking to do. Okay, so I'm just going to show you 4 or 5 drills here, based off my principles, or the principles that's on the document. Okay, so this is one of our sub-principle games. Okay, so we're looking at getting our head up to deliver the pass. Okay, we want to deliver the pass into the pockets on either side of the 45. So it's basically a 5v5, 6v6, 3v3, whatever you want. 2 players can break out of the square to receive the ball, but they can't run in straight lines out past the flag. Okay, when they receive the ball, they get it back into the square to take their passes. You can put as much touches or as little touches as you want. You might only put 1 touch and then you got to deliver the passes, and on they might have to take 2 or 3. So I'll just let it run. Okay, so you can see here it's a keep ball. Okay, and then you're delivering into your pocket. So your sub-principle of your half-forward line, picking the ball up. Okay, back into your square. Again, pressure's on the ball. You're looking up and you're delivering to your teammate back into the square. Okay, so this might be your sub-principle game. Okay, you're looking up, you're kick passing, you're getting your head up, and you're looking to connect with your teammate on the far side of the pitch. Same as a game. If the Reds turn it over, same focus to get their 3 hand passes and to deliver to their teammate. So you might run this for 3 or 4 minutes. So then, kind of moving into our principal game. Okay, so this is our principal game, our main principal game. So we're connecting up our defence to attack. The coaches is the black dots. They're feeding the ball in. Okay, so you'll see our 2 phases in the yellow boxes. That's our midfielder running out to receive the ball. Okay, so he's phase 1 of our transition and attack. Okay, so creating space in that halfway zone, and then our half forwards are getting into the pockets. So this is more kind of still a more general game, but it is working on our main principle. This is our main principle game, and we get more specific on the next one. Okay, so we just let this play. Yeah, there we go. So Blues are the team transitioning. Midfielder's on, plays it into our pocket. Okay, so the Blues, obviously, if it's not a shot, the Blues are looking to get runners off and help the full forward and get their shot off. Okay, so he took the score on because he was at the edge of the D. So again, it's more specific. It's our main principle. If we can see what we did in the last game, okay, it wasn't as specific, but the same message was being delivered. We wanted to deliver the ball into those 2 pockets, and we wanted to work it back into our square. Same here. It's a wee bit more full game. It's our principle, getting it into our pockets on the 45 via our midfield setup into our 45, and then we're connecting with our full forward who's staying deep. Okay, so that's a main principle game. Okay, so now we're just getting even more specific. We're combining our contesting possession, so our kick-out structure. So just to explain the setup, the keeper's purposely in the goals, because you may have an 8v8 in here. It's more just to play the move off the kick-out more so than working your kick-out strategy. So you may have an 8v8, so you want to create as much space. They can receive it inside the 21. Obviously not ultimately specific, but it's working on that transition. We've got the ball in their defence, but it's also incorporating your goalkeepers. So they're working with the Blues. The 2 black dots, you could have 4 black dots if you want. They're coaches or players that are maybe just resting in this drill. if the player's taking loads of touches and starts soloing through the middle sector and slowing down the play so we can't connect to their half forward line, they'll go and press and turn over the ball. So they only get involved if the defender's killing what's happening on the far side of the pitch. Thankfully, they're not needed to be involved in this clip here. They're just players move it first time. Okay, again, you can still see the same principles, the same message from the first slide I put up. The main principles: depth and movement. Sub-principle: look up, pass forward, kick pass and get runners off. So the same message, even though each game has been slightly different. One's a sub-principle, one's a main principle game. You can see that the same message, so the players aren't getting confused in any way. They know the game I want to play. They know my sub-principles. Every game I'm doing is delivering that same message. Okay. Just going to then move into conditioning games. So more exclusively conditioning games, but again, still delivering the same message of my main principles and sub principles. Okay, so this is just a 4 corners game. You score on the left hand side, so in either one of the yellow boxes. Once you score down there, you attack the other end. Okay, no other rules really apart from that. You can put in if you want one touch, etc., but we'll touch on that as we go. Okay, pretty general, more of a conditioning focus. When we're coaching it as a coach, obviously your usual principles: stay wide, don't get stuck to the ball, make the pitch big, etc. But really, there's no real stipulation involved. Again, if you score one side, you attack the other. So it's all about high speed running, getting your meters per minute up. Okay, so just a conditioning game. You score either end. You can make a big pitch or a small pitch. Okay. Now, how can we implement? That's fine, that's perfect, but how now do we want to deliver the message that we've delivered in the last few slides in our conditioning game slide? Okay, so how do we do that? Because you put a halfway line in to score on one side, everyone has to go across bar 2. Okay, the 2 lads have to stay on the far side of the pitch to receive the kick pass, and then everybody floods forward bar 2. Okay, so again, it's going back to our sub-principles. Look up, kick pass, get runners off. Same message again. There's no confusion to the players. They know what type of game I want them to play. Every drill I do, I'm delivering the same message when we're focusing on this moment of the game. And that's hugely important with the player. I'll just let this play. Exact same game, just that we're connecting up with 1 second. Sorry about that. Play from current slide. Yeah, so just play from the start. Exact same game. Okay, when they're attacking blue, everyone's come across the halfway line, and now he's connecting. First thing is to look up and hit our forwards. We get our runners off. Just play that once more. Okay, so you can see the messages there. Okay, the half forwards are breaking out to collect the ball in the pockets. Okay, he lays it off to the runner. I think the black marker might have to do a wee bit of speed training there. He's left for dead on the blue, but yeah, you can see the concept of what we're looking to do. Again, it's still delivering the same message. The message to the forwards: break out to the pockets, look up, deliver, kick pass. Again, it's a conditioning game, but it's delivering the same message. Okay, and then just the last kind of conditioning game. This is maybe if you want to take, if you want to move away maybe of delivering the message. This might be a different moment of the game. This might be a defence working on closing space when you're a man down or whatever it may be. But it's just an example of how you could maybe incorporate a repeated sprint in a game. Instead of maybe lining up on the 45, you sprint to the 45 and you stand still and go again. Okay, so this is just another repeated sprint game, which predominantly is physical focus, but again, you can put your message in the game as well. So it's a 6v4 game, constant attacker. So the Blues are constantly attacking for 3 minutes, 2 minutes, whatever it is. Once they hit the yellow zone where the red and blacks are, they drop the ball, they run back, pick up the ball, and they attack the other side. So they're constantly attacking 6v4 the whole time. So they have to score, sprint back, build their attack. The defense have to get out, close space, and work through the defensive zones. Yeah, so the score have to sprint back, pick up the ball, and then they gotta set up another attack. Okay, so there's just examples of games that I have, and the challenge for you, and Stephen touched on it, the challenge for all coaches, and Stephen touched on it, is all these drills are great, but how are we making them fit into what we want our players to do? Okay, we can go to these coaching conferences, pick up some great drills, but they're drills that fitted Stephen Rochford's philosophy, or fitted Colum's philosophy, or Keane O'Neill's philosophy. Okay, but how are we going to get our message into these games? Okay, it might be small changes here or there, but how are we delivering the message we want our players to do when we hit onto the pitch, when we're designing our games? And that's where we need to go as coaches, and we need to try and incorporate that into our conditioning if we can, especially with younger athletes, in my opinion. Okay, so just maybe so you can kind of maybe see the numbers, what that'll look like in a condition. So I don't want you to get caught up in this too much. Some may have experience with GPS, some may not. Some may be sports scientists, some may not. So what I basically did here is just a 4-minute. I just pulled out 4 minutes of a game where the demand was highest in our highest demand game of the season. There is other strategies for doing it if there is sports scientists there, but this is just a simple, just pull out for 4 minutes. So what we did in the session was in interval 1. So this is adult senior inter-county data. Interval 1 was just 30-15, so run hard for 30 seconds, rest for 15, and was even more prescriptive than that, but that was the gist of the intervals. And then we went into game 1, which was the game I just showed you, is the specific conditioning game, where it was the halfway line and you had to press across. So you can see here how high the intervals, nearly every interval is higher than game demand. Okay, so that 4 minutes were conditioning higher than game demand through the interval. But you can also see from the game that we're not far off it. Some metrics are higher, some aren't. So that's where we need to get our balance. With your adult players, your senior inter-county, you do need to incorporate them intervals for what you're picturing here. You can see that the demands are greater than the highest demand they may have in a game. But your conditioning games are also having not as much of effect, but they're having a big effect. So when we're developing our underage player, what is he going to get more from? Intervals without the ball, or really honing in on developing his technical and tactical inside a conditioning game with principles? So again, it's putting it back on you to challenge, what does your player need? Is your underage player technically both foot, has all the game awareness where we can move and neglect time to football, or do we need to really work on that and then implement our conditioning intervals? Okay, obviously, as you can see, when we get to adult football and senior inter-county, for me, some coaches may argue differently, but for me, at adult football, you do need to implement it to get higher than game demand. So that's just a snapshot of a session I would have ran with your GPS data, just to show you the demands that are there. Okay, so when we're trying to map this all out, so we have on our paper, we have our moments of our game, we have our principle, our main principle, we have our sub principle. Okay, now how do we design our game? So there's numerous considerations to have when you're designing your small-sided games: how big the pitch, how many players, how long or short the duration is going to be, the design of the game, the rules, work to rest, competitive or non-competitive. So all these considerations you have to weigh up when you're doing it. So the longer your game may be, obviously the less intense it's going to be. Okay, so if you're playing longer small-sided games, that may fit in under your kind of specific football session. Your shorter, high-intense efforts will come hopefully under your conditioning. But if you're trying to stretch it out to a 10-minute game, obviously it will be demanding. But you're kind of moving more into working on to maybe what your opposition are looking to do, what you want to do. Okay, so when we're kind of looking at our pitch sizes and our numbers, okay, the bigger pitches. So there is research papers, Mangan and Casey, again, they're attached at the bottom, have really looked in depth at this. Okay, so the bigger pitches, the players are running more high-speed running, more very high-speed running, compared to smaller pitches where the frequency of acceleration, stop and start and change in direction are a lot higher. again, then you got to weigh up your positioning. Okay, so your midfielder, if he's just spending his whole time in small-sided games, are you conditioning him for what he's going to do in the game, and vice versa, your forwards and full back line if they're staying in? Are you conditioning them by just playing big games? Okay, so it does have an effect on what you're looking to do, and then your stipulations, the rules you may add in, then increases the demand. So, one touch, or you can only score by coming off the shoulder, or whatever the stipulations may be. Okay, so that's just some consideration when you're designing your small set of games. And then what it might look like. So if you're just fully embracing tactical periodization model, okay, so your Tuesday night, your sub principle of play, so it's your smaller games, a lot more accelerations, decelerations, change of directions, 5v5s, 8v8 games. It's probably your longer session of the week. Okay, and then your Thursday session then is your speed session. Okay, so big pitch, looking for players to open up. You can push it to the Friday. Just my experience with players to kind of have in their head that they want to be fresher for Sunday, even though you're probably bang on doing it on Friday. But again, that's a bigger thing. You got to weigh up the population that you're coaching. So again, your kind of Thursday or Friday session is your main principles of play. So it's your big pitch, you're connecting what you've worked on, you've identified your moment of the game for that night, and you're working on it through big pitches, high speed running, very high speed running. Pitches a wee bit shorter, the duration of the sessions a wee bit shorter, so 45, 60 minutes, and then into your game on a Sunday or Saturday, whatever it may be. Might be a competitive game, or you may run a game yourself at training, or maybe another main principles of play game. So you can see what it would look like and how you would map that out. Okay. Yeah, that's kind of it for tonight. As I said throughout, there's a few different other resources if you want to use. The Shane Mangan did a presentation in the summer, or in the last lockdown. It's on the GAA. Kildare did one on the on small sided games in hurling, and then myself and Paul did a conditioning in Gaelic games. I've tagged them in there. It should bring you to the link. The hit science then is the small sided same games demand. So Brian Cullen and Shane Malone put that together for that website there not so long ago. So you'd see they're just additional resources if you want to go a wee bit more into it. But we said myself and Paul and two other the Kildare staff are developing another deeper tactical periodization one. So hopefully we'll have that ready to go in a wee while. And yeah, and then your references are just there at the end. So if you want to dig even a wee bit deeper, there might be some S&C or sports scientists there probably have seen it, but he's wanted to dig a wee bit deeper, or some of the coaches may want to. It's all there. That's it from me really in regards to presentation. I'll just stop sharing my screen now, and if there's any questions, fire away.
Thanks very much, Ciaran. Just a quick note before any of you take any questions. Just to note, we will be sending the recording and the presentation. I know myself just watching some of the games, and that Ciaran was showing was a wee bit glitchy, so we'll get them sent over to you and Ciaran's presentation. Also, just Ciaran was using Tactical Pad. It's a software for designing your games online. There's a free 30-day trial with it, and then I think you have to sign up. So it is worth having a go and see if it's any use to you as a coach. And if you have any questions, you can put them into the text box, or you can raise your hand there, and you can turn on your mic. And if we take any questions, Dr. Cian O'Neill, the Cork current coach, senior team coach, is taking a webinar next Monday night from 7:30. I know there's probably some of you have overlapped and booked on it already. If not, just keep an eye on the Louth social media pages for the link, and you can register on that. Yeah, so there's someone joining here. If any questions there, you can type it into the text box.
Yeah, and just Jeff, so in your opinion, is there still an important place for running athletes at the end of the session? It depends on what's happened before the session. So it depends on the demands of the session. So and also the time that you have. If it's been a high demand session and players have worked really hard, and you need to add it on first and foremost. But secondly is speed, where you want to go. Do you want higher speed condition at the end of the session when players are fatigued? Probably not. So there probably is a place if you need to top players up or they didn't cover what they needed in the training session. But personally, I would probably go with more conditioning interval strategies to tag on at the end of the session. Again, it depends on what's happened beforehand. If it's a high speed session, you might want to complement it with some conditioning at the end. But yeah, there is a place. It's just what has come before the session and what the focus of your conditioning is. Preferably, I would go with kind of slower based interval conditioning just to take that risk out of it. But they would have had a speed exposure somewhere across the week. What age range would you suggest starting conditioning games? Yeah, well, like, there might not be conditioning games to start with. There might just be games, and then as they progress through the age groups, you put in more restrictions to make them more demanding. So, like, even use goal games, they're just games, but as they progress through, you may add in other progressions to make them more demanding. You may not dress them up as conditioning games. They may be just small-sided games, and you're just working on your principles of play. Yeah, I would start. If you're working on principles and putting them into small-sided games with a conditioning element, 13 or 14, okay, you mightn't go as deep as you would with a 16, 17, 18 adult, but you may start dropping concepts at under 14s. You might start introducing them to pitch zones. So if your ball's in zone 1, jam into zone 1 and zone 2, leave zone 3 free. But that's all you might touch on. You may touch on forward, depth 11 and 14, stay deep. So yeah, I would start. I'd have games in as soon as possible. There's loads of guidelines there from the GAA in regards games, small-sided games, and using your coaching through that. But in regards conditioning and sub-principles, I suppose, well, under 14s, 15s, I would start dropping certain elements of it in and build on it as the years go by. If you're using intervals at that age group, well, then I'd be trying to lean towards more conditioning with the ball at that 13s, 14s, 15s. What app would you recommend for capturing match day info that could work from a tablet? You mean in terms of performance analysis? I suppose anything I did, I've kind of had someone involved with me that was looking after that. Performance sports, if you're just looking for one-off games and getting your data back and your recordings of it. And obviously the big softwares like Dartfish and Sports Code. If it's conditioning and in regards GPS metrics, I suppose the ones I have most experiences with is Stat Sports. So yeah, I'd be pushing it towards Stat Sports, and they are sponsors. But yeah, no, I'd be pushing towards Stat Sports to now have their new individual athletes, so the coach can actually get access to the data without having the whole overall system. So that would be the two I would use. Hope that kind of answers that. Would you do recovery session with your squad at the end of the session, or leave it down to players' own responsibility? Personally, I leave it down to the players. So some teams, players may have a tradition of doing it. Preferably, I don't really do anything in a sense that the players have just gone through trauma and the session's been quite demanding. Their body's in a fatigue state. There's probably micro tears. If you're staying out for 15 minutes in the cold and stretching and pulling at the muscle, it's probably not going to do the huge pile of benefit. If you were to do it and you wanted to do it, maybe some light jogging just to flush any wastage out of the body. But personally, I don't. The big things I go for is getting the players off the pitch and getting carbohydrates and protein into the player, so to speed up the recovery as quickly as possible. Getting them home so they can get their feet up and get to bed early. So they're the two things I chase after a game, is getting nutrition in and getting the players to bed. And the next day, then obviously in an amateur sport, it's not as applicable. But the next day, if the players can get out and do a light activity, preferably a bike or a walk, even with their even out kicking ball with their friends, if it's an underage athlete or if it's an older athlete, just get them out moving, go for a walk with their partner or whatever it may be, or get out on the bike, just do 20 minutes. If you have a spin bike, just light like 20 minutes, 15 minutes on the bike, just flush out the legs. But I'd stay away from any kind of structured stuff after training personally, but some others may have a different view on it. Yeah, so the difference between Maz running and tempo, as I have coached boys who are running at the same pace for both, example, 5 meters per second, so running 75 Maz in 15 and tempo at 120, both obviously 5 per less recovery time. No, so tempo and Maz, so tempo is moving fast, okay, so tempo is calculated 70% of your max speed. Okay, not 70% of Maz or any relationship with Maz. So it's worked off your max velocity speed. So it should be faster. So if you're doing 100 meters, you want the players covering it in 14, 15, 16 seconds, depending. This is gauged off adults now. But yeah, you're looking for them in that 15, 16 range. So their meters per second a lot higher. When they're in their Maz, then obviously it's slower. An example you said, you're probably hovering in around your 5 to 6 meters per second. Well, usually, but yeah, so your tempo is calculated off your max speed, not your Maz. So yeah, it should be faster. So for that example of your session, you want that player covering the 100 meters in 15 seconds, not 20. If they can't tolerate the 100 meters, just make the distance less and increase their time. So just basically whatever, if it's 20 seconds, if it's 100 meters, they complete it in 20 seconds. So just the distance by your time in seconds, and you'll get your meters per second. It's a rough gauge of what you're looking to do. So yeah, your distance by your seconds, so you get a rough gauge. So to move it to 50 meters, and then you have a target of say 5 seconds, just divide it and you get your meters per second. So again, 70% of max speed for tempo, and conditioning is off your Maz, so your time trial. So yeah, tempo should be faster, a lot faster than your Maz. Would you change the size of small-sided games depending on what part of the macro cycle you're in? Introduce 5v5 later as there will be more max velocity. Yeah, so when I'm macro cycle, probably not. Yeah, so you're going to have your small-sided and your big-sided games incorporated in your week. But in your session planning, you may finish with your 15 through 15 as your last session. So if you kind of look at when you're mapping out your session, that every drill is that wee bit more intense, with your last drill being your most intense. So it's nearly like a gradual warm-up in the session, with your highest demand activity is your last 15 minutes. So it might go from a tackle technique grid into maybe where it's not much demand. So warm up, tackle technique grid, more working on technique, body position. Then you may go into sub principles, play of game. So maybe use that kicking game I used, and then you might go into your big pitch where there's more demand. So yeah, I would kind of, when you're mapping out your session, finish with your kind of highest demand last. Once you've had a nice flow to your session, once it hasn't been 100% from the start, if there's a gradual flow when you're building up towards it, then definitely, yeah. But in regards to your overall year, no, I'd have 15v15 probably in from week 1, but you'll have your small-sided games built in around that in your session. Some sessions may combine both. Hope that answers that. Running players or subs after a game, how much should they've played in order for them to do extra running? Depends. Usually I'd work off if it's inter-county time. So if they've played 55 minutes, I would, anyone who's played that, or so anyone 15 minutes or less would do conditioning afterwards for me. But again, if you're able to monitor what the player's doing throughout, you may have different demands on your players. Some player may have restricted minutes, some player may have coming back from an injury. Some player has been on the bench for the last couple of weeks, may need to do more. So just a few considerations when you are running them. What has your player done over the last wee while? Has he come back from injury? Has he sat on the bench and hasn't did much over the last couple of weeks? So you might vary your post-match conditioning depending on your subs. But if on a blanket rule, 15 minutes or less, I would have them doing post-match conditioning. But again, in Gaelic terms, it depends on your environment and how it works. In pro sport, it's different because they're paid to they're paid to be fit and run. But in GAA terms, you just got to weigh up the culture and the environment that you're in. I think
okay, folks. I think we'll leave it at that. I think that's all the questions that we have. Thanks very much. I think we're up on 100 people logged in at the highest point tonight, which is great. Just stay tuned and on the social media for upcoming webinars. I think we have a few more lined up. I'd like to thank Ciaran for an excellent presentation. Very well worked out and everything. The presentation was excellent. As I said, I'll email over the recording. If not this evening, it'll be tomorrow. Also with Ciaran's slides and his video clips from in the webinar. Thanks very much, Ciaran, and thanks very much to everyone for logging in. Stay safe.
Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.